All right, so my presentation is called Understanding the Barriers and the Power of Community Connection for Urban Residents to Grow Their Own Food. And this was a picture from our event that we hosted in January. Okay, so quick overview here: the problem, question, research, deliverables, so what, and acknowledgements. So the problem is, while many urban residents who even have the financial means are interested in growing their own food, barriers arise that prevent this activity from becoming an indefinite lifestyle. And so some become educated and don't take the action, while some implement growing a few times and then don't continue. And so I see that in order to create a food secure state and create it so that people are actually making this into a long-term lifestyle where it's just something you do. Growing your own food is as natural to people as brushing their teeth, even though maybe a couple more details. We need to understand what are the barriers that people are facing. And the reason that I chose people who have the financial means to do it is because I've seen in other communities where people who don't have finances as a barrier to entry, that when they work on something or they do something, they're more willing typically, and that's what I found in some of my initial just interviews with a couple of people, they're more willing to help people who don't have the means with education and resources and things like that. So wanting to understand the perceived barriers people are facing emotionally, mentally, and physically to growing their own food and continuing on with doing that. So my questions are, if people have the financial means and the interest and still don't make this a lifestyle, why? What is it? Is it that, and part of my thought around it is community and the lack of emotional connection to that community, and having it become just an integrated fabric into what they do. What sparks someone's desire to learn about growing their own food in the first place? So if somebody doesn't come from that background and they are now interested in it, why are they interested in it now? What sparked that for them? And how did they get from not knowing to knowing? And are there ways to influence the probability of long-term success by implementing specific emotionally connecting experiences in the beginning of their journey, along the journey, and then what kind of support do they need ongoing to continue feeling like they're connected to this experience? And, I have two number twos. It's really obviously supposed to be number 4. But once they learn, feel connected, and make this a lifestyle, are they willing to reach out to other food insecure communities and support them in getting started? So it creates an ecosystem where the roots continue to expand metaphorically, so that once somebody learns, they're able to take it out and share it with more of the community and create a model of teaching that engages people emotionally, mentally, and physically. So the research will map out the key barriers that inhibit the behavior change in relation to growing their own food. And primarily, again, focusing on people who seek out the education, but either implement and don't continue, or don't actually implement it at all. So I talked with Patricia about some of the ways to do that, and we're gonna start with narrative interviews to leave it a little bit more open-ended with some of the community that Brilliant Planet already has and hosts at our eco destination. And then speaking with a couple other, so Green Box Farms here in the Valley, and then the Urban Farm and some of their constituents, and just getting some feedback from them and understanding why they do this through the narrative interviews. And I'll be speaking with people on those, and then creating a survey from that. And I'm also looking at doing a little test program where we create a process, if we can have people out to our land based on what's going on with social distancing, and taking them through a small process to see if the emotional engagement creates more interaction and more implementation of their education. And then the deliverables will be a report and an actionable plan with identified barriers by the numbers. So just showing, okay, what people perceive their barriers to be, the real and perceived barriers for people, and then the psychological tools that motivate change and increase engagement, and suggestions on processes and strategies to lower perceived and real barriers. And then the product output of the research will be provided to educators, experts, like small companies here that teach, farmers, and cities. I spoke with Joseph, and he said he'd be really interested in the city of Phoenix looking at something like this to help implement some of what they're doing. So utilize this in their outreach and education, and then follow-up support, because it offers us an opportunity to see an overall way to reach people with different techniques like neuro-linguistic programming or different learning styles and things like that to help them. And then obviously the emotional engagement with the community. So what? So this is a really important piece to me, and I believe in just our overall shift into a more food secure state. Because with a detailed understanding of the barriers people face, we can deliver more effective education and tools and positive emotional connection, which then leads us into creating this as a lifestyle of just something we do. And if every single person just, or many more households feel it's just something we do, we just grow our own food as part of, you know, what we do in general, we will be able to create a lot more food security. Communities can share food, looking at, you know, back when victory gardens were a big deal, there was a lot of food sharing going on. There was a lot of consistency in finding more peace around having that food for yourself and your community and being able to share. So it feels very important to understand the barriers to that and why and how we can help lower those barriers and create a connected community. Acknowledgements, Patricia, thank you for your help and thoughts and the research. Janice and Greg have provided, Janice has provided a lot of insight and ideas over the last couple of weeks and even months, and just helping me direct this and create clarity on it. Greg has always been an amazing mentor, and he has so many wonderful ideas and all the education and all of that. So I'm very grateful for that. Robert at Green Box Farms has, it's a small company, and so he's been talking with me about what he sees in the barriers for the people that buy from his CSA and things like that. Sarah and Don helped to create our user experience, and so they're a big part of, you know, that community creation and connection, and how people perceive the experiences of growing their own food and becoming part of that community. And then the Pollination Project, which is a community network that I'm part of, that's provided a grant for us to also create some educational pieces to bring community together to learn this and then implement it as a lifestyle. So they also have a community that we can survey and interview, and they're national, but they do have a pretty significant base here in Arizona. So that is that. I am open to questions.
Great. All right. Let's have some questions, responses. I don't see anything happening in the chat just yet. I actually do have, I'll start off for you, Tara. I don't like to always start them off, but I always have questions. Thank you for this. Actually, I think it's really interesting what you're doing. You're kind of like trying to sort out the obvious factors, right? Like, you know, once you get beyond some of that, you know, easily understandable barriers, now what? What is this that actually is the barrier to transformation? I mean, in resilience kind of language, we might think about it of you know, sort of in the transformation language, moving, not just being resilient and bouncing back from any kinds of food insecurities, but, you know, bouncing forward kind of language. So have you thought about like, what are, that's one obvious one to me. Have you thought about like, what are some of the other terminology or concepts about resilience that you might start picking up in when you're starting to talk to people about this? I know you have already a lot of lived experience with it, but have you heard any of those kinds of concepts coming through, and what do you think you might do with that?
Incorporating other resilience terms and things
Yeah,
like that.
like some of the things that we've been talking about, are those popping out for you? What are what are your thoughts around some of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a lot, and there's been a lot of shaping of this project through resilience, and I probably just need to spend some more time taking the language and applying it. So that's great feedback. It, like, immediately, I don't have anything specific but I want to work with that to more effectively apply it. So that's great feedback.
Yeah. Maybe in some of those, because I know you got some open-ended in the focus groups. That might be one place to start to look for those when you go through that methodology.
Awesome. Sounds great.
I imagine that, especially now, there's a lot of talk about resilience, and I think that would be very interesting to see what pops up. People do use the word resilience now, I feel like, more than they have in the past. Now, with the pandemic upon us, I just see it everywhere all of a sudden.
Yes, I agree. It's everywhere.
Not just in our academic circles or how we talk about it, but it does seem to be more prevalent. So it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Any questions or comments? Okay, Greg has a question.
All right. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me. I, over the past decade or so, have developed, I call it my 99-1 rule. People change 99% of the time because they get hit by a Mack truck or COVID-19. And 1% of the time people change because they choose to change. And what I've been attempting to do for the past decade or two is to get people to choose to change around this. And this is more a ponderance than a question to answer, but what kind of structures can we put in place that motivate and get people to that change? I don't have an answer for it, but I've been pondering it for a long time.
Yes. And I think that's such a powerful question. And that's part of what I've seen for sure in people in transformation. It often takes a
Mack truck.
Yeah, to hit them. And and perhaps we're in a perfect time to understand this better because of COVID, and now people are more aware of it. And so it's like, hey, let's not wait until something else hits. Let's create this transformation and have adaptability and resiliency applied now. So I'm seeking those answers in this. What causes change? Can we do it from a place of positive emotional connection with community instead of the negative, fear-driven reason for change?
And then how do we get it to stick? I think that's probably one of the things you're pondering.
Yes.
Yeah. Good job. Thank you for doing this, Terra.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, in response to that, Greg, I think that's a really interesting question. I think you could also consider framing it in terms of scale. And there's lots of really great kinds of discussion around scale that we can help point you to thinking about it. Because there's the individual scale, but there's also maybe a neighborhood scale. And then there's this larger systematic scale. And I feel like those barriers are going to be slightly different, even when you're talking about maybe social cohesion or some of the organizational cohesion, which is another great resilience term. Maybe that the scale at which you're looking at can have a difference in whether those things are going to be longer term or whether they're going to stick, like Greg says, because you can make choices as an individual, as a family, but you're kind of at the mercy of some other things that are systematic. And it would be interesting to know which were those things, which things are the barriers that are closer to, the implementation scale, I guess, maybe for lack of a better label on that. And then which one would be more of that long-term, the competition, the costs of inputs, the costs of the relative costs of food. I don't know, what are some of those barriers that might be there, material and psychologically systematic barriers?
I love that. And I love looking at it from those different, I see them as like rings, right? So the individual and then the society and the community. And so thank you. That's great. I'm going to incorporate that.
Okay. And maybe that's a way that you could also get your respondents. I know you want to leave it somewhat unstructured, but methodologically you could get your respondents to start to, you know, frame it in that sense. Otherwise they might just stay in one frame, right?
Yes.
That way you can get more of that.
Absolutely. Help them move outside of just the individual.
Okay. Janice has a question here.
Terra, great job. I love where you're going with this. I was wondering if you had considered, once you find these answers to your questions, how are you going to make it useful, accessible to others who are going to be, you know, maybe doing the same thing?
Doing the same thing in terms of education and outreach and all like that sort of thing.
Yeah, or anybody else who might be interested in you using the lessons learned that you've gathered from this. Where do we access it? I mean, obviously I'm super interested, but there's probably others that are you know, would like to build on what you grow from this.
Definitely. So I'm looking at doing a report and then also like a spoken presentation through PowerPoint and loading that on our site and making it as, you know, as available as possible to anyone, just because this seems so, once we have these answers, it feels very critical for a lot of us that are working in this area of transformation to be able to just move forward with, and it will include the tool sets of, you know, whatever tool sets we find we need to overcome the barriers and create the long-term change.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Well, obviously you have the support of Greg and I to get your questions and your surveys out.
Thank you very much.